Okay, give us just a second here so we get our camera changed out so we can show you the slate test. But one thing to keep in mind there, I know a lot of times these demonstrations, we're putting some pretty extreme situations up there to demonstrate the situation. But that would have been about a 4-inch per hour rainfall is what that would have simulated that soil can uptake. For those of you that are doing some no-till or have some neighbors that do no-till, you'll notice across the turn row a lot of times the no-till field won't have any water standing, and all of a sudden the conventionally plowed field will have water standing. What you're seeing there is the increased infiltration rate. So what we're going to do now is we call it a slate test. Very simply, it's a soil aggregate stability test. This is something you can do on one of your farms if you choose. Basically all you need is a clear cup and some water. And what this shows you is how much more stable we can make our soil aggregates with a developed management system. Now, please keep in mind when you do these tests, we're always showing you what we can do. So these soils didn't get this way overnight. And if you're working on your farm, it's not going to get there overnight either. But it is very, very achievable. And what you should realize is that all these soils you saw in both these videos are local soils. They're not brought in from anywhere else, right here in this area. So we can achieve it. So what we're going to start just to show you is the no-till soil here. So this has been in a diverse crop rotation, had several different crops, had a mixed species warm season cover crop on it. Basically these two farms border. Look at the difference in color. Same soil. This one, it's hard to see. I don't know if the camera guy can get it, but you see right here, we have a wormhole. So let's get us two semi-sizable soil aggregates. So those are about the same size. Here we're going to drop the no-till, drop the conventional till. Be sure we got everybody to kind of the same water level. Okay, so as we're looking, it's just completely falling apart. Notice how stable this is. It's just kind of sitting there, a little bit of it's falling off, but it's pretty well holding together. What you're looking at is your soil structure right there. It's doing exactly what we want it to do. It's very stable, very buffered soil, very resilient. So if you had for example, a 4-inch rainfall event, which it seems in the last few years, like Patrick was showing, we go from bone dry to a 6-inch rainfall event and then it quits. Don't get nothing more. This is going to have a hard time infiltrating that. This soil right here will get as much as it can. Now, will some go out the bottom? Sure it will. If we get a 6-inch rain in May in a single event, will a crop be able to utilize that whole thing? Probably not, no. Some will run out the bottom. But I guarantee you, if you had a 6-inch rain on this farm, you'd probably watch most of it run down the bar ditch. And, you can just see there what it's doing. It's just completely turning into mud water. What we're really trying to do with our soil health systems is get back to this. And we can do it. So that loamy soil y'all saw in the video was something like a Amarilla fine sandy loam with slate. Now if we get to our fine sands, they just don't have enough particles to ever hang together to do that. But if a fine sandy loam will hang together, this will be more like on the lines of an Olton or a Pullman clay loam. Pretty heavy soil. That's why in the video it ran off so much as it did, because it's a little heavier texture. But I think it's pretty amazing right there that we can just watch that and look at how big a just visual difference is in between those two soils. And see, that clod is still fairly stable, and I don't know if we have, nope, nothing left. Completely gone. So that's what we'd like to achieve in the major advantages, and we can achieve that. And that's off of what I would call a local farm here in this area. So this is something that is achievable for everybody in this room, but it will take some management and a little bit of time.
So what exactly is going on? Why did that one soil fall apart? What did the water do to that to make that happen?
You're just looking at the lack of structure in the soil. So water is pretty much just a solution that makes things soluble, and it just dissolved the dirt. The clod on this side has structure, had pores, macro pores, so it allowed the water to infiltrate through it. This one, it just simply dissolved it.
Is Dr. Zach in here? Would you like to take a crack at that question?
Sure. So part of what's going on with that, with the soil that's not breaking up, is fungi produce a lot of carbonaceous material that glues soil particles together, so they can fall apart. And so one of the reasons why the soil on the other side is completely gone, there's not enough fungi to have produced those glycoproteins and carbohydrates that glue soil together. One of the things that's interesting too about fungi and soils is by gluing that together, they don't blow as much because they're actually being physically held in place. So whether it's your saprophytic fungi or your mycorrhizal fungi, which produce a lot of compounds, the plants and those fungi are producing those compounds that actually glue that soil and help contribute to that structure. And if you don't have it, it's just simply going to fall apart. But that's how all natural systems function.
Brandt, I've got a question for you. You told me one time that, you know, a lot of times you think that people confuse good structure with something that's no structure, granular. Would you expound on that a little bit and explain how, you know, people walk out into a field or a pasture, you know, native range, and if it's dry, you know, it's harder, and
okay,
on and on.
So let's talk about what Arian's talking about. So a lot of times, say we go out into a field that's very intensively worked, say intensively plowed, and if we walk across that and it's very soft, we think that's very mellow. And say it's in a dry time when we've really just pulverized that soil and turned it to powder. But if you look, when soil gets dry, just because it's hard doesn't mean that it's not necessarily not mellow or well structured. If you think about, for instance, right here in the semi-arid rain area, if most times if you try to go dig a post hole out in rangeland in August, those post hole diggers are going to bounce back and get you in the head. Now, does that mean that soil is lacking structure? No, it doesn't. It's lacking moisture. So just because a soil is hard does not mean it lacks structure. A lot of times that's a function of moisture. So even though a soil may be hard or cracked, does not mean that it lacks structure or function. It lacks moisture. And so a lot of times when we say we have a hard pan or we have a hard soil, I don't believe we truly have a hard pan. We have a dry pan, and I can give you a perfect example of this. If we'll think back to 2011, driest year we've ever seen in modern history. We were out in a cornfield in Dimmitt, Castro County. They still have fairly good water. You know, we were on a farm that had about 5.5 gallons per acre per minute. Corn looked pretty good. We dug up a corn plant, and down there at about 12 or 14 inches, root made a 90-degree turn. We got down there and got to looking, well, is that really a hard pan? Not really, no. What else happened? At that level, we also ran out of moisture. And that was a no-till farm, and for the area, the corn looked better than anything else. Well, why was that? Because he's harvesting that moisture, and that root got to that dry pan, and is you know, Dr. Zach or any of our researchers will tell us, roots won't grow through dry soil. whenever it gets to a point, they go lateral. So a lot of times when we see a lateral root, we assume we have a hard pan. And historic thinking has been, we'll address that with horsepower. And what I mean by that is we'll get the ripper, we'll get the moldboard, we'll get down there below a foot and we'll break that hard pan. But I would venture to ask this question: in our climate, wouldn't it be much closer to being a dry pan as to a hard pan? Probably so. And I think we see some of those things in extreme years. Now, do I want to see another 2011? No. No, not at all. That wasn't good for anyone. But I think we can use some take some lessons from some of those years and look at things. And so just because you have a hard soil doesn't mean you don't have structure. I believe it means we have a dry soil, which is very common here. And I think we really need to look at that when we're looking at our soils. I hope that answered your question, Ariane.
Okay, I've got a question, Brandt. So let's take those two soils like you used in the Slate Test example, and let's put that in a field situation, and let's just say we're using irrigation as the source of the water. How much more percentage of the water do you think is going to be available to the plant in that stable soil compared to the other one?
I would say a significant amount. Now, to put a percentage or a number on that, I can't necessarily do it. But what I can do is say, look back at, as being an agronomist, let's look at our agronomic crops. We have lots of growers that have some no-till systems in place that will stretch their irrigation water. For example, I've seen some guys be successful with corn on 3 gallons a minute. Now, as an agronomist, I would not recommend that. No, 5 gallons a minute's a minimum, usually. But they have made that work. So what's the difference? I would venture to say that they're doing a little bit better job with their infiltration. So they're just getting it in faster and allowing that plant to utilize it a little bit better. So Kelly, to put a solid percentage on that, I don't know that we can, but I know we do more. And we can just look at that from our crops. Generally speaking, in a no-till field compared to a conventional field, the irrigation comes much later, and it seems like when we make that pass over the top, an inch seems to go further. And that's all I can really tell you. Most of y'all know what I'm talking about when it goes further. You put that inch down and it just, old plant seems like it's just perking up.
The residue has a big part to play in that too.
Yes, sir. So as we add residue cover, think about this. We're going to moderate our soil temperature. So we're not really changing our plants at all. And in a cotton system, this can be a little bit tricky, especially early on when we need those heat units to get it going. But this is the example I use. If I'm working in 70-degree weather, I may drink a gallon of water a day. If I'm working when it's 105 degrees, well, I may drink 5 gallons and then I can't go no more. So those plants are the same way. If that soil temperature is more moderated, they're able to use that water more efficiently, just like I am when I'm working out in the heat.
2 questions. Why is the one soil darker than the other? And then you said I could change the bad soil into the good soil. What would I do as a producer to make that happen?
Okay, what you're looking at here is mainly just a function of organic matter, and the biotic glues, all the root exudates, make it the darker color. Now, one thing people always ask about is organic matter in this part of the country. I don't really worry about organic matter because we can't build enough of it to really measure accurately. So what you have to do to turn this or turn this into that is basically a management system. So we're going to have to stop the disturbance, which usually means reducing the tillage, increase the diversity, which means bringing in a crop rotation and usually some cover crops. And when we do that, the whole management system comes to life, okay? So if you've heard NRCS talk about it, it's soil armor. So usually we want residues on the soil, decrease the disturbance, and increase the diversity. And with that, we mean true crop rotations. So it would be, say, a cotton wheat rotation with a summer cover crop in a no-till system. So to achieve that goal, it has to be a systems-based approach. You know, you hear a lot of things talk about cover crops and them being the magic bullet from a lot of guys in the upper Midwest. But if we look at what they did, they already had no-till systems. They were rotating crops, and then they incorporated a cover crop, and some of them brought livestock into the rotation. Livestock is very good, but what we have to keep in mind is you have to keep everything in context. And like we saw on a map earlier, our evaporation, pan evaporation. So somewhere in the Dakotas, say South Dakota, let's just use Brookings for an example, that would put you east to about Vernon, give or take, rainfall wise, comparing, you know, evaporation. So those guys can incorporate the livestock, but they'll pull out with more residue than we can generally grow if we're trying to cover crop without irrigation. So, you know, it's achievable, it just takes a few years. And so in an irrigated situation, we'll need a minimum of 3 years to get there. Dry land, 5 or more, depending upon how good the years are, how dry it is, crop failure. And, you know, in a cotton system, wind erosion is always going to be a concern. So there will probably always be a need for some emergency tillage from time to time, is a guess.
Yeah, talking about livestock a little bit, you probably don't really think about it like this, but every person in here that farms is actually has livestock that they need to take care of. A lot of us think of cattle and sheep and goats and the typical livestock, but the other livestock I'm talking about is our microbes, and that's what's basically building this system for us. And, you know, we don't think about them because we can't see them unless we have a microscope, and they're probably the most important thing of this whole deal that we're trying to promote here.